Hello once again, this is Jonathan, and I wanted to take just a few minutes here in this video and I wanted to show you how we are growing these tomatoes you see behind you in containers. You may think that growing tomatoes in containers may limit your harvest and that they won't do very well, but I want to show you that that's not the case and our tomatoes are doing very well. So first, before we actually dive into the ways that we've grown these and go over the details, I just want to take you on a quick little tour and show you how these tomatoes are doing in these containers. So we have a number of different varieties. Some are heirloom varieties, some are hybrid varieties. Many of these we started from seed before the temperature got warm enough, and we transplanted them out once the summer temperatures started to warm up and the frost danger was gone, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the video. And you can see here in our area it's not very humid, so we are able to grow these pretty dense. I have two grow bags side by side, so basically most of these are 2 grow bags deep for this area going around our patio. But you can see that the tomato plants themselves are very happy, and we're starting to get some fruit on them. Right there, I actually just picked our first full big tomato the other day that had ripened, and we have been getting some of these golden cherry tomatoes as well. They're doing really well. Some of these, we have a stripe variety that's deep in that you won't be able to see, but that is starting to ripen. And we also have a nice, what looks like a hybrid variety right there that is starting to ripen. And that one's doing really well. But as you can see, we're getting big tomatoes. Our harvest is doing very well. And the more you look at these plants, the more you see our harvest is going to produce very well. I'd say maybe the one downside to growing in containers is that you do have to water more often. But that's not that big a deal. And another thing we'll talk about later on in the video is I want to talk about companion planting. Something that we've done is we have grown basil in with these tomatoes. So there's some basil that we've been harvesting from, and there's several basil plants mixed in between. We've also grown pepper plants. And so I'm going to show you a jalapeno pepper plant that is kind of growing underneath these tomato plants and doing very well, producing a lot of peppers. So as you can see here, there's some beautiful jalapeno peppers that could be picked now, but I'm going to go ahead and wait for them to turn red because I actually like jalapeno peppers to be red and fully ripe. So as you can see, tomatoes grown in containers can do very well if you take care of them. Now I'd like to go over what we did, what we used, and how these tomatoes are doing well even in containers. The first thing you'll need is, of course, the containers themselves. We're actually using a 15-gallon grow bag. It's kind of a felted polyester grow bag. And we opted, instead of the wide 15-gallon, we went with a very deep 15-gallon. And the reason for that is because tomatoes grow really well if you're able to get a good deep root system, and it allows the tomatoes to get nutrition from all different levels of the soil, and it holds moisture down low in the grow bag. And so a very deep grow bag is better than a wide grow bag, especially if we're talking about container gardening for something like tomatoes. The second obvious thing that you will need is some kind of support. And I think the easiest support for growing tomatoes in a container is just one of the galvanized tomato cages. These we purchased at Lowe's, and they're only a couple dollars. You can see there that the tomato is supported on that wire cage, and it is holding the fruit up very nicely. And since these are grown very densely together, like I mentioned, the tomato plants are kind of holding up each other and everything is supported totally fine. The next really important piece of the puzzle is, of course, soil. And while you could just dig up soil from your yard and put them in grow bags, I don't believe you'll have quite the success that you'll have if you buy a good quality potting soil. For these containers, we tried a few different soils and we found that the G&B Organics Harvest Supreme seemed to do the best. If you have a very limited budget and you can only spend so much money, I would definitely say, no matter what, spend as much money as you can on the soil, and you can figure out some other kind of alternate container. Don't spend a lot of money on the container, spend a lot of money on the actual soil itself, because if you have really good quality soil, the plant will be healthy, it'll be disease resistant and pest resistant. The next thing we did is we added a starter, a G&B Organic starter fertilizer, mixed that in with the soil when we planted these plants. And we also took an egg and we went ahead and put that down in the soil and crushed it right below where we were going to put the tomato plant roots. And then the last thing that is optional, but I believe it could be needed, especially when the plants are young and small, is some kind of bark mulch. So I've covered the supplies we use and the supplies you need in order to grow tomatoes in containers. Now let's talk about actually planting the tomatoes themselves. So the first thing is, what's better, to actually buy tomato seeds or to buy tomato starts from a local nursery or a local farm? Obviously, buying plant starts is going to be a lot more expensive per plant, and if you're able to grow these from seed, that is going to be your better choice. But in most climates in the United States, unless you're in a kind of tropical kind of environment, you'll want to go ahead and start these seeds inside and then go ahead and transplant these out once the frost danger is over. You can do an online search with your zip code and your last frost date to find out the estimated last frost date for your area. Once you are clear of a frost, you can go ahead and put out your tomatoes. If you plant them before, they will die because they are very frost sensitive. So if money is tight, growing from seed is definitely going to be the best way, but also you'll get access to a lot more varieties by growing from seed. We often grow from seed and buy starts, so we do a combination of the two. So that's my favorite way, is to get a lot of unique seeds, use those seeds, and also buy some of the varieties from your local nursery or your local farm. As we mentioned before, make sure you buy a really good quality soil because that's going to keep your plants healthy. And when you do plant these, like I mentioned, you want to take an egg. I believe this is really good for nutrition. You want to crack that at the very bottom of the hole, and you want to dig down really deep. You want to dig down a nice deep hole. And if you're planting a tomato start, you want to go ahead and take off some of those lower leaves and stick that stem down deep into the dirt without actually covering some of the top foliage, because roots will actually form from the stem of that particular tomato plant, and it'll have a bigger, better root system, and the plant itself will be much happier and much healthier. And then once again, we mentioned a starter fertilizer. You want to go ahead and use that starter fertilizer and mix that in, and in the future you'll want to fertilize the plant as well. Since you're putting good money into the soil and the fertilizer, it makes sense, if you can maximize space, to go ahead and do some companion planting as well. As we mentioned, we grow basil and also peppers in with our tomatoes, and they seem to be doing very well, and they have done well in the past. And then when I talked about the supplies you need, I mentioned mulch. Mulch can help keep moisture in the soil. It can also keep the soil from being sterilized by the sun, killing all the good microbes in the soil, and it just also makes them look nice as well. So those are the supplies we used, and that's the methods we used to plant these tomatoes that are doing very well. Now I want to talk about how we've cared for them over the last several months and what we will do in the future. First of all, as I mentioned earlier in the video, when you grow tomatoes in containers, you have to make sure you keep them watered. If you grow tomatoes in the ground, you might get away with watering less often, but in a container, you need to probably water most often daily in the heat of the summer. The tomatoes will let you know they need water because the leaves will actually droop a little bit and they'll show signs of needing water, and you want to make sure that you go ahead and water those regularly, and that'll keep the plants healthy and it'll keep them thriving. This is especially important when you have fruit on a plant. Really regular watering will make sure that you have good, healthy tomatoes. And if you water a lot and then don't water, and then water a lot and then don't water, you can actually get cracking on your tomatoes. So regular watering daily in a container is probably the best bet if you want to have a good harvest. And then of course we used a starter fertilizer when we planted these tomatoes, but you also want to make sure that you use a tomato and vegetable fertilizer throughout the growing season to keep the right nutrition in that soil for those plants. Periodically, you'll need to trim off some of the yellow lower leaves or anything that looks diseased or bug infested to make sure you keep that from spreading throughout the rest of the plant. If you live in a very humid environment, somewhere that is more tropical, or somewhere in the east coast of the United States or other parts of the world, you want to make sure that you actually thin the tomato plant down to one main stalk and allow a lot of air to pass through that plant so you don't have issues with mildew and powdery mildew and issues like that. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned some things about growing tomatoes in containers, and I hope that you have success in growing tomatoes on your small patio porch, or maybe you have a large backyard but you just want to grow more tomatoes. And so I hope this video helps you, and I hope you find success in growing tomatoes. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something and that you enjoyed it. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button so you can know when I put up new content. Also, if you could please click that like button if you did enjoy the video. Thank you so much.